Yeah, you can give us the clap now. Perfect. Okay.
All right. So one of the things that I'm curious about is where you came from and how you came to Pond Farm for the first time.
How I came to Pond Farm?
Yeah, how did you come to Pond Farm? But maybe
Well,
even just start by saying where.
Marguerite was giving a seminar at San Diego State over Christmas vacation. I didn't take the seminar, but a very good friend of mine did, Mark Fleming. And he came by to our place. We were living in government housing. I was a student at San Diego State. And he said, you got to come and see this movie and hear this speech, this talk of Marguerite. And he was very impressed with her. And I was at the beach, so I came home and Niva told me this, and Niva, my wife, and she said, and we'd had a little tiff, nothing, but just a little tiff, and I wanted to get out of the house. So I went out to San Diego State, and there was a parking spot right across from the art department, and there was a little station wagon there, old station wagon with a strange fender to the front, and this little woman is sitting in there with this big, huge roll of film. So I pulled in, and she rolled down the window, and she said, "Are you here for the talk?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And she said, "Well, pull in here very close to me because there are going to be a lot of people here soon." And she says, and it kind of made me mad. I was already a little perturbed anyway. So I came back and I pulled my little Volkswagen in so close to her door she couldn't get out. And then there was nobody there. And she said, "It must be because you're so close to Mexico that you're going on Latin time." And I said, "Well, I don't know, I mean, I'm on time." So we started chatting, and she said, "Are you a student here?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "What are you studying?" And I said, "I'm studying sculpturing." And she said, "You're studying the history of sculpturing?" And I said, No, I want to be a sculptor." And she said, "Well, you're kind of old to be studying sculpture." She says, "In Europe, if the boy had any talent, they would apprentice him at 12 to a sculptor." And I said, "Well, I got a late start, but, Mayal got a late start also." And she said, "Oh, well, Mayal, there are hundreds like Mayal." I thought, hundreds like Mayal? I love Mayal. I thought, God, who is this woman? There are hundreds like Mayal. And then I went in and I saw her movie, and I listened to her talking. And then she had some pots down in the pottery studio. So after the talk and so on, we went down there, and I looked at her pots, and everybody was gathered around, and she had these cases, in these glass cases. She opened them up so you could handle the pots. She wanted you to handle them. And I looked at those pots, and I was just blown away. And she said afterwards, everybody kind of thinned out, and I was still there looking at the pots, and she said, "Well, what do you think about the pots?" And I said, "I don't think anything at all. I just think they're beautiful. They're really beautiful." And she said, "Well, maybe you'll amount to something after all." That was my first critique from Marguerite: "You're too young." My last critique, I had a bunch of pots. She had asked me to bring pots to see what I was doing, and there was a chest in the in the guest cabin there, and I had a bunch of pots there. And she came up to see them, and at that time I'd been making pots probably 25 years. And she looked at them, and she turned them around, and she looked at all of them for about 45 minutes. And then she came over, and she whispered in my ear, "Don't worry about it, David. I learned more in the last 10 years than I did in the first 60. So first I'm too young, first I'm too old, and now I'm too young." So that was the first critique and the last critique she gave me.
But David, you went on to be well, you were a student, but then you also transitioned to being a teacher with her. So how?
I went in 1960. I went as a student for 9 weeks. The sessions were 9 weeks then, and then I went back in '61, and then she asked me for 60 to come and teach the beginners for the first 3 or 4 weeks and make clay for her and do the odd jobs around. And she took some extra students to pay me for that, to pay for the thing. And it was very difficult teaching with her because you had to be there all the time and on your toes all the time, but at first you just didn't know what to, I asked her, I went up the first time and I asked her what she wanted me to do, and she said, well, whatever you can. And I did, that's what I did, whatever I could. And then that didn't work out so well because I taught for 3 weeks, and then the next 6 weeks was supposed to be mine to study with her, only the students got used to coming to me, and so they kept coming to me and I couldn't get any work done. So the next year she said, just come and help me. So I helped her for the 9 weeks. And I made sure the clay was ready, and I helped all the beginning students, at that time she was getting older, and as you get older, you don't have the patience with people to say, kick the wheel. No, you're too fast. Kick the wheel. No, pull it up. No. You have to repeat it over and over. Her teaching technique was she told you and she showed you, she demonstrated. And then you did one, and then she demonstrated again to show you what the mistake you were making. And the steps were progressive from the easiest, and then you learned what you learned on that one, you took to the next one, which was a little more difficult, and a little more difficult, and a little more difficult, and you wound up, the last step was making a teapot. I think it was making a teapot. It's been a long time since I've been through those steps. But she was, it was all hands-on. And you would go by and she would go by and say, you would have a plank of pots there, and in the beginning she would say, well, that one's pretty good and that one's pretty good. And in the beginning you can't see. I couldn't tell the difference. You can't tell the difference. And gradually you start to see, oh, this one has more form than that one has. It has a better shape. And it takes, the classes were 9 weeks long. It takes about 6 weeks for the average person to get through the steps. They don't learn all the steps, they just get through them. You kind of know how to make it. And then the last 3 weeks, she wanted you to do something to see what you could do with that information. She wanted you to do that. Mostly, people just did what she told them to do. And when she assigned a problem, whenever she assigned a problem, she assigned it was always vague. It was a vague kind of a problem or a project. And the reason it was vague, they'd always come to me afterwards and say, what did she want with this, But if she told them what she wanted, they would do just that. But if she made it so vague, they had to kind of figure it out for themselves. And they would come to me and I'd say, I don't know what she wants, because I knew what she was doing. She didn't say that. She just did it. And the thing is, like a problem would be, later on, this wouldn't be a beginning problem, this would be a later on. She would say, do the 4 seasons in a tile and related to one another, the 4 seasons. Well, that can go almost anywhere. And that's what she wanted. She wanted to see what you could do. Then later, when she stopped accepting new students, she cut the classes to 6 weeks, which was plenty long enough. It was very intense. It was very intense. We started at 8 o'clock in the morning, and we took a 10 o'clock coffee break. Well, sometimes the coffee breaks, depending on in the later years, Marguerite would tell stories, and sometimes the coffee breaks would last till noon. Sometimes she would read to us. She would read Alice in Wonderland, or she would read T.S. Eliot, or she loved the T.S. Eliot's Practical Cats. She would read something from Marcus of Tyre, some old Greek or something. Marguerite, when I first went up there, I had spent 4 years in the Navy as a dental technician, and as a dental technician you have a lot of extra time, and you don't have much money, so you can't go into town all the time. So I read all the time. I came out of the Navy after 4 years with a sort of liberal education. I read everything I could get my hands on. I read, George Bernard Shaw and Jung and Freud and Tolstoy, and I just read and read and read. I also read all of Mickey Spillane. And I read all of these great ideas, Thoreau and Emerson and Marcus Aurelius. And I thought, boy, it would be wonderful to actually live by those ideas. But Marguerite did live by those ideas. You could sense it when you walked on the property, that this was a special place. You could just sense it. And when you talked to her, you could sense it. She was really the start of my education. I had two great teachers, and she was the best. Not only in pottery, Pond Farm, you think of Pond Farm, and people think of it as a pottery. It was a pottery. It was a school, but what it really was a work of art. When Marguerite made Pond Farm, when people would come up and they'd say to her, "How did you find Pond Farm?" And I didn't find Pond Farm, I made Pond Farm. Well, she made it. It was a work of art. If you're in a zone or a state of art, what you make is a work of art. And you could walk up on that hill and back across the road from Pond Farm. You could walk up there by the eucalyptus trees, which she incidentally planted, and you could look down on Pond Farm, and it was beautifully positioned. The guest house was in the right place, the barn, the studio was in the right place, her little garden was in the right place, there was a little peach tree out front, there was a bench there, and she would sit there in a red sweater, and that spot of red was just in the right place. It's just exactly where you would put a spot of red. And it was, it was unconscious, but then that's the way it was. She was so in tune with herself and that nature and the thing up there.